I'm doing the second Bible reading. I'm doing it for Tani, who's recovering from a cold. Perhaps before jumping in to say yes, I should have checked to see if there were any genealogies in it, which there were at the end. So disclaimer in case I stumble over those fantastic names. So it's Genesis chapter 4. It's on page 6 of the Pew Bibles. Genesis chapter 4, verse 1. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favour on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favour. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." But the Lord said to him, "Not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad, and Irad was the father of Mehujael, and Mehujael was the father of Methushael, and Methushael was the father of Lamech. Lamech married 2 women, one named Ada and the other Zillah. Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all who played string instruments and pipes. Zillah also had a son, Tubal-Cain, who forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain's sister was Naamah. Lamech said to his wives, "Ada and Zillah, listen to me, wives of Lamech. Listen to my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times." Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son named him Seth, saying, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him." Seth also had a son, and he named him Enosh. At that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, welcome again. If you were late, I'm Will. Just keep your Bibles open, because I think this is a very important chapter and here. So if you haven't been here over the past few weeks, we've seen God make the world with order, create humanity with their own agency, and then humanity falling. away from God, which gets them expelled from the garden. And at the heart of what it means to live outside the garden is separating the vertical from the horizontal, by which I mean living the way we do in this world without reference to the vertical, which is who we are in Christ. It's to say the really important stuff of life, the stuff here, the now, the stuff I can taste, touch, see, everything else is glory to me in the highest. Let's leave God out of the picture. And in Genesis 4, we see that sin spreads, and the way sin spreads, it produces people who say, I'm going to find my own way back to the garden. I don't need this God guy in my life. He just gets in my way. And this passage comments on our sin, a sin that if we're not careful, will crouch at our door and overrule us, alienating us from God and preventing our relationship with him. And we know something's wrong right from the start of the chapter. Look down and look at chapter 4, verse 1. We read that Adam knew his wife, Eve, and she conceived and bore a son, saying, I have gotten a son with the help of the Lord. Do you hear what Eve says? I have gotten me a man. I did it. The verb literally means acquired. I manufactured this man. And then God gets a small mention on the side. He's somewhere distant. Eve has begun to believe this philosophy that God helps people who help themselves. And just so everyone understands what this is about, she names her son Cain, which means acquires. Same thing. It means possess, success, manufactured, succeeding, acquiring. And Cain's life is monumentally and ultimately pathetic. It's a pathetic attempt to separate the horizontal from the vertical, to separate his relationship with God from everything else, and his relationship with his younger brother Abel. So you see, Cain plays the part of the religious man. He goes to church, and when offertory comes around, he digs into his pockets and he puts a bit of spare change on the plate. And when he comes out to find that God has accepted his brother's gift over his own, he's furious. He's indignant that God can decide the terms of what is acceptable. And we know that Abel, his younger brother, gives an offering that is pleasing to God. But Cain cannot handle that judgment. An English novelist, and a really good definition for sin that I always come back to, is that sin is a deep interior dislocation of the heart, which is what we can clearly see here. Cain gives his offering, and when it was rejected, he doesn't say, fair enough, or consider how he might be to blame. He boils in anger. He becomes hot-headed, rash, and his heart dislocates from God. His want to simply have an offer pleasing to God has overtaken his relationship with God. He's lost his relationship with God, and his face becomes downcast. Literally, his face fell. He's lost sight of God. But what happens next is not something we might expect from a story. The generous God now steps in, and he provides Cain a warning. He says, Cain, what reason do you have to be angry? If you do what is right, you'll be accepted. And God gives Cain advice in verse 7 that is so valuable to both him but also to us. And Cain fails to listen. Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. What God is saying here, that sin always hides itself. You see how Cain and Abel are very similar. From the surface, they look practically the same. But Cain's heart is dislocated from God. And it's so subtle that not even Cain sees it. In the same way an animal crouches in the tall grass, so does sin in our lives. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, animals crouch down normally to hide or to downplay their size. And it's the same here with sin. I'm not a workaholic, I'm just a hard worker. I know I shouldn't nurse that grudge, but it's not that bad. Sin always tries to stay hidden, But in doing so, it leads to a spiral and becomes worse and worse and worse. It compounds upon itself as it takes hold in our lives. And in the very early stages, which is where God comes to talk with Cain, he still has control. But sin isn't a matter of a one-off choice or giving into selfishness, the greed, the search of power just once. Sin is a power. It comes into your life and takes shape. You see what happens to Cain, right? Cain's heart is gripped with deeper and deeper and furious resentment. What once was in his control is now so far beyond it. How dare God accept my brother's offering and refuse mine? I mean, God ought to be grateful that I took interest in him in the first place. And in the end, Cain's anger spills over in the bloody murder of his younger brother. He cannot imagine that God sees what he's doing, and he takes Abel's life without remorse. And friends, it has to be that way, doesn't it? If Cain's going to decide what's pleasing to God and what's not, then Abel must get out of the way. I mean, if I'm going to play God and I'm going to decide the rules of right and wrong, then if you're also playing God and deciding those rules, you need to be out of the way. The most natural thing here is to get rid of you. But ultimately, we've also got to see that Cain's murder of Abel is a strike against God by rejecting God's authority in the place of his own authority. That's what's going on here. And immediately, it happens again. You see, verse 10, this amazing kindness of God to Cain. What does Cain deserve? Well, what he gets from God is a command that he now has to wander. But also, God promises him protection. And immediately, Cain goes whiny. Why does it have to be me? Why are you doing this to me? It's not fair. Poor me, poor me. And God says, I'm going to protect you. Anyone who touches you, I will take revenge 7 times. And Cain goes further and further from the garden, east of Eden. And so we come to the second half of chapter 4, which is where we're going to spend some more time in, to watch this spiral of sin get worse and worse. And Cain wanders far from the garden, full of self-pity and full of enormously productive and creative energy of anger. In this little section, 17 to the end of the chapter, there are 2 lines, 2 descendants, 2 different cultures, if you will. 2 ways of living in this world. 2 ways of relating to God, and they're both perfectly described by Ede's words. The first line, the line of Cain, the Canaanite culture, and Eve has already described it by naming him in verse 1. The one who acquires, the one who possesses, the one who controls. This is a very important passage for understanding what the world we live in today. And we must all feel sorry for those who aren't here, those who can't make it. Because what this passage does is it teaches us how to understand the culture in which we live in. How not to overvalue it, but also how not to undervalue it. It's a deeply complex passage because the culture, every culture we live in, is deeply complex. There's a paradox that happens in culture. The further humanity moves away from God in sin and darkness, there's also a rise in prosperity and the arts. There's a rise in business and agriculture, because when people stop listening to how much they matter to God, they become driven to prove themselves. Let me put this the other way around. Increasing technology and science and the arts doesn't just simply lead to human advancement. It is always accompanied by a desperate attempt to cut God off, cut God out of the picture, and say, glory to me in the highest. We see this through this passage. Just look at verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he, Cain, built a city and called the name of that city after his son Enoch. Do you see what's going on here? The exact opposite of what God commanded him to do. God said, "You'll be a wanderer, but I'll protect you." And Cain goes, "Forget about that. I cannot trust you to protect me. I have to protect myself." So he doesn't only build a house, but he builds some walls and then a city out of guilt, out of fear of what people might do to him. He's agitated and anxious and highly successful. See, he constructs walls around himself to protect himself from others. And in an act of tremendous arrogance and anxiety, he names the city. Do you see what he names the city after? He names the city after his son. What an important man I am. I reckon Freud would have an absolute field day with Cain, don't you? You know, his fear came out of guilt because of what he's done to his brother. And it drives him into this amazing productivity. And his anxiety and his ambition and his tremendous success. And he surrounds himself with tokens of his prosperity to show that he doesn't need God anymore. And then we have Cain's line. Cain's line are given to us in those middle verses, which Ruth read out for us. And we come to Lamech, who is the 7th generation from Adam. In verse 19, Lamech took 2 wives, one by the name of Ada and the other Zillah. Ada bore Jubal. He was the father of all who dwell in tents and have herds, and his brother was Jubal. Oh, hang on, that's the wrong way around. Jabal was the father of all who dwell in tents and have herds, and his brother was Jubal, who was the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe organ. And then his other wife, Zillah, bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Nema. Now Lamech is the poster boy for Canaanite culture and the Canaanite way of life. He's living the dream. He's got all he wants, combined with the cruelty and self-centeredness and vengeance. He lives in open defiance of God. And the first thing we read about him is that he takes up 2 wives in direct contradiction to the will of God. That was back in chapter 2, verse 24. Direct violation of God's will and a direct degradation for women. See, because of this rise of culture is also marked by spiritual degeneration. There's something wonderfully complex about the rise of culture in Cain's boys. It's not all darkness and degeneration. You know, these instruments and abilities of culture, they're God's very good gifts. Agriculture, arts, technology. The flute and lyre are used in psalms to sing praises to God. And they're used here, and they can be used for great human good and human welfare, and even for the glory of God. But they also can lead to a dark side. So we read about the 3 sons of Lamech, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain. All 3 of those words, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal, come from the word to produce. These boys are highly resourceful, productive, high achievers, A-grade students on the honours list, doing everything on the outside that they were to do. The point is this. Here, in the middle of Canaanite culture, in the Canaanite city, the city built in defiance of God, there is music, and there is drama and painting, and there is artistic expression to the family of Cain. And the line of Cain is held in God's grace, even in their rebellion, even in their alienation from God. Even though they've tried to cut God off, God continues to pour out his good gifts into their lives. Yes, it's true. High culture is most commonly used to romanticize evil. And yes, it's true that neither low culture or pop culture or high culture can bring us redemption or can bring us closer to God whatsoever. Yet, it's God's blessing of common grace. It's not just reserved for his people, He shares it with all his people, even those who hate him. You see, the growth and development of technologies, they're all taking place within the Canaanite culture, completely without mention of God. The horizontal and vertical have been separated. The technology and the arts and the science in the Canaanite culture, they're not dedicated towards the good and welfare of others. They're not dedicated towards the glory of God. They're dedicated to the glory of me. They begin in murder and they end in murder, as we'll see in a second. You see, there are good things in this world. Nuclear science is such an amazing thing. It's used for medicine, but it also has a dark, dark side. If you've ever seen what happened at Hiroshima or any nuclear disaster site in the world, you'll appreciate just how easily something good can be used for an unimaginable evil. And this is where we get to Lamech's song. The song used at the end of a culture divorced from God. This is verses 23 and 24. Lamech says to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Hear my words. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. A truly terrifying scene. It's full of anger and rage and testosterone. And okay, some Bible commentators say this should be put to a rap. It's kind of gangster in that way. And Lamech says to his wives, I'm proud of killing a child. Why? For wounding me. In fact, it's worse than that. Some people suggest that this word should be bruise. A young child bruised me, so I killed him, is what Lamech is saying. And at the heart of this song is the raw pleasure in the fact that he has murdered a child because they dared to lay a hand on him. The ultimate devalue of life. And at the end of the song, he turns and he mocks God. And he glories in his own revenge. He says, God can only avenge Cain 7 times. But if you come to me and if you lay a hand on me, I will avenge myself 77 times. Glory to me in the highest. See, 77 is a significant number. It's a number in this culture that means completeness, complete vengeance, complete rage for simply laying a hand on me. But what is so striking about this song is that it's a celebration of violence that comes to us in a poem, in a song. We must not miss that. Lamech's boast of his own raw violence is a piece of art with great human energy and creativity. You see that appearance of art in the Canaanite culture is associated with this murderous man. And it all, the vitality of human energy, but also of murder. See, Lamech personifies what it is to be cut off from God, to cut oneself off from God and to use music and poetry and self-expression to exalt oneself. And it's good. I mean, in one sense it's good. It probably would have won Canaanite pop idol contest. But it's simplicity, energy, clarity. But it is a celebration of evil and of exponential revenge. So what do we do with that? We have the ultimate devalue of human life. And what do we do with that? Well, if we turn to Matthew 18:22, it's really interesting what stands out here. And I think Jesus remembers these verses because when Peter comes to him and he says, how many times must I forgive my brother? Even 7 times? Jesus tells you, not 7 times, but 77. It's an avalanche of forgiveness. The avalanche of revenge seen in Lamech can only be dealt with by the avalanche of forgiveness and that is found in the death of Christ. And the forgiveness of Christ that can change a human heart, to forgive the violence and the revenge that has been committed against us. There is a way of dealing with culture of violence and pain, and it's not the human way of achieving, it's the human way of receiving. Lamech can have his complete vengeance, but it's no match for Jesus' complete and perfect forgiveness. And this takes us, for the moment, to the other two of the lines. The second line, the second family. In the last two verses of the passage, verses 25 and Adam made love to his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in the place of Abel, since Cain had killed him. Seth also had a son, and he was called Enosh. And at that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. These two beautiful rays of light at the end of this passage. Have you noticed the change in what happens to Eve? At the beginning of the chapter, she said, I've gotten a man with the help of God. And now at the end of the chapter, she says, God has granted me a child, literally a seed. It's all of grace. He owed me nothing, and he's done it out of his love for me. And this birth demonstrates his purpose going forward. And her faith now begins to shine through. And when Eve says, God has given me a seed, she's remembering back to chapter 3, which we read last week, verse 15, to the promise that God made that he would send a seed who would deal with the evil, and in its very, very sweet moment, she knows that God is working his purpose. She trusts in his grace. Adam and Eve go from a series of events from we have acquired to God has given. And how does Seth's family live in this violent culture? Very simply, he and his family begin to call upon the name of the Lord. And to call upon the name of the Lord is to bring the vertical and the horizontal back together. It's to see that everything I do, all of my life, it's lived in the presence of God. Everything I am, everything I do, everything I have, everything I am is his. And to call upon the name of the Lord means to speak with him, which is why we pray together at each service, which is why many of us will pray alone to God, and it's why we have prayer and praise nights here once a month. In the midst of this culture, in the midst of Canaanite culture, the worship at the shrine of prosperity and art and technology, a culture that devalues marriage and exalts violence, there is a group that's trying to figure out how to use art and technology for the promotion and the glory of the name of God and to call upon his name. And I think that's the greatest gift that we can offer any culture. And it's the most important thing that you can do as an individual or we can do as a church. It's simply to call upon the name of the Lord. Because sin's spiral into darkness is no match for the perfect forgiveness that is found in Jesus Christ. Amen.
Hi, I'm Tim Mildenhall. I'm the Senior Minister here at St John's Asquith. We're a group of ordinary people who've come to know the extraordinary love of Jesus. And so what that means is we think everybody matters. I'm not sure what's brought you online today, but I'm glad you're here. Please feel free to get in touch with us. We've got a bunch of services. We'd love to see you in person. Welcome.